Hello, student. Welcome to presentation number 6. This is salvage markets for materials and organics. I guess the question that comes up is, what's a market? Well, we know we can go to the corner and maybe buy a loaf of bread or something at the market, but a market in some ways is not different than that. Other than that, we can look at those around us, other businesses, community, organizations, and they're all part of a market. You know, they say that sales is everything. Well, in many ways, it is in our economy. So the market is whoever you can sell to. But in particular for waste and recycling, an entity, the market would be an entity such as a glass plant, a steel mill, a scrap smelter, a composter, a paper mill, anybody that buys or accepts your used commodities. Now, I'm using the term commodities, because that's what recycling is all about. Commodities are things of value or goods, and usually of uniform quality, that are produced in desired quantities by many different producers. Used, quote unquote, used refers to whether it has been used before, such as a secondhand antique, or perhaps the cooker shown above, or reduced back to an elemental state like the glass shown in the background of this slide. The individual that's showing the cooker there, he created that, looks like out of a water heater, and added a few other attachments and stuff like that, and then he's got a cooker. So that in effect becomes a used commodity. So economic activity concerned with the processing of both virgin and secondary commodities and manufacture goods in factories. That's kind of what we're really talking about. And of course, virgin refers to materials that are just like raw, drawn from the ground, drawn from trees, the air, the water, while secondary commodities are those that have been previously used. And possibly a third of the world's economic output is derived from recycling manufacturing industries. I think I mentioned before that about 40% of our nation's GNP was at one time during World War II, back in the 1940s, 1945 to be specific, was recycling in nature, secondary materials. But today is like less than 1%. In fact, a tenth of a percent just about. So we can say that a lot of the world's economic impact is really stuff from outside the United States, although we're a huge shipper and exporter of a lot of our materials. So even though we may not use it specifically, ultimately somebody is going to use it. How did we really get where we are today? It's been kind of a long and winding road, or as Al Gore said, some energy candle. We're at a period of time in which we've never been so energy intensive, and of course have so much per person. And this is like kind of spread all over the planet. Not everybody has everything, obviously, but enough have something that it makes for pretty much a consuming society. But the Industrial Revolution, 1760 through 1820, machinery production and the factory system really came into being, and it allowed a lot of development that pretty much had to be done handmade, one by one. When you made a book, you had to stitch everything together. You had to write everything in there. It was an undertaking. Uh, and then there was an energy crisis in 1850. We ran out of wood and animal oils. Prior to that, it was like whales were one of our main sources of burnable energy. And we ran out of wood, cut down a lot of trees, and did away with a lot of animals. So we had an energy crisis. And what do you know? We found out about oil out of the ground. Black gold, Texas tea, And the first thing you know, well, we're all a millionaire. We told our kinfolks that we're moving away from there. No, 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 I'm not going to start singing. So anyhow, the post-Civil War of 1879 saw us doing a lot of steam transport, railroads. Things were starting to really move, and actually a lot of cities that had been concentrated, like New York and other areas, began to spread out to a lot of other areas, and a lot of smaller communities, farm communities, ranchers and small settlements suddenly became big. They were connected by railroads. There was new people coming in. There was a lot of change that was happening. We saw a lot more consolidation and centralization, and that seemed to lead a lot of things towards the time that we see in 1906 to the present: planned obsolescence and the mass production revolution. Electric motors allowed us to really do things on a mass scale. Gasoline engines, we could move, speeds that we even counted our engines on the basis of how much equivalent to horses, 200 horsepower. We had vacuum tubes, and oh my gosh, people could fly. We could actually put people in planes. It just was a tremendous mass production, planned obsolescence revolution that saw huge growth from the 1900s all the way to 1975. And then towards the year 2000, the information revolution has just been totally an amazing activity, spreading across the world, unifying, but also causing plenty of, you might say, pushback from a lot of folks who don't want to be assimilated. Nobody wants to be assimilated. Um, so I think it was a Star Trek show about assimilation. The Borg, I think it was, yeah. You are to be assimilated. There's no, you don't have a choice, type of thing. And for a long time, people have felt that there wasn't a choice. You either had to get with it or get out of the way. That's kind of changing a bit. Um, but one thing we can see is that since 1940s, there's been a real downward trend for recycling. And that has a lot to do with kind of the issues and problems that we're seeing, that reuse and reduce and recycling kind of went to the wayside as we began to really focus on what we could do to really mass produce and mass consume. And planned obsolescence made all of that possible, because it was a matter then that you don't keep stuff durable. You don't want durable goods. You just want to use it once and throw it away. And it really has permeated our society. We even have, disposable relationships, it seems. Divorces are the highest they've ever been. So I mean, there's a lot of issues, that come along with the physical things that affect us in life. And the throwaway ethic espoused by Life magazine in 1955 really epitomized, where we are and where we've been, and to the point now where we're threatened with both with a lot of different apocalypse, whether it's climate or plastic or disease or something, chemicals. It's just uh, pretty much a very difficult situation that we are facing these days. So where are we? Are we in perhaps a post-industrial U.S.? Well, let's take a look at that. There's been a manifestation in the U.S., an increase in the service and information sector at the expense of manufacturing. So there's been a decline in manufacturing, and kind of that decline refers mostly to job loss. Job loss in the United States, though, a lot of it went overseas to other places. Cheap labor, capital follows cheap labor. That's an issue with capitalism, and an issue with really any kind of system, but especially with capitalism, but very much with a linear economy. You're looking for ways to decrease your externalities and increase your profit margin. And the development of an information-based economy spurred by the internet, my gosh, started to allow a lot of people immense accumulation of wealth, and an increase in automation. Although skilled workers are required to make the machines and operate and maintain them. Undeniably, the character of U.S. manufacturing is changing, and nothing portrays this better than e-commerce. Still, e-commerce is not more than about 10%, even with the pandemic. And pre-pandemic, it was like about 3%. But now it's clearly the handwriting's on the wall. We're moving towards other areas, and people can buy stuff from all over the world. But there's pushback on that too. Buy American now. We're hearing that more and more. So maybe there is a potential for increase, and we need to take advantage of that. Okay, and I'll talk about some ways that we can. But unfortunately, as domestic manufacturing has decreased, our imports have risen along with an exponential growth in waste. Because as we import more and we don't have any industries to take care of that stuff, and nobody wants our waste, where does it go? No, there's no way. It stays right here at home. We simply don't have the industrial capacity to recycle our stuff now. So we were forced to send it overseas, and now we can't even send it overseas. So now we're stuck. And our laws force the issue by mandating minimum recycling rates. That leads to a market glut, a supply glut, and not enough ability of the market to consume a lot of these things. So costs continue to rise. Well, there's resource recovery markets, of course. Now, it's not a well-known fact, but most recyclables are not consumed by the recycling industry. No, most recyclables are consumed by the virgin materials industry. Materials that have not been previously used or consumed or subjected to processing other than for its original production, e.g. trees and the paper. That's what the virgin materials industry can be defined as. Secondary materials is where stuff has been previously used or consumed and subject to processing. Now, the reasons that the virgin materials industry uses some recyclables is that there's lower cost, in many ways. Not necessarily for plastics, but for metals and glass and things like that. There's lower cost. There's also technical specification and environmental protection. Glass plants can, and this is a really interesting fact, but when you melt glass for the first time, the ingredients for glass, it has to reach a threshold temperature. But if you throw recycled glass in, they call that cullet, it doesn't have to reach the same level of temperature. It can have a lower temperature, not a whole, not a huge amount, but enough to make a significant difference in pollution and in energy usage. And so a lot of plants will just use 5%, 10% cullet just so they can meet air quality and energy requirements, for their particular industry. Now, currently, like I've mentioned, recycling represents like about 0.1% of GMP, down from 40% during World War II, but it's still $110 billion in revenue. And if you take a look at our entire country, we're what, $20 trillion a year. The entire globe is $84 trillion in gross world product, GWP. So when you take a look at 110 billion, that's kind of on average there in revenues. That's quite big, and it's almost double what trash is. So I believe our big goal in this decade and beyond is really to build our recycling industry up again, to reindustrialize America. Take advantage of the fact that people want to bring industry back home. So let's build local. Let's build small, appropriately scaled for urban areas. And there's some wonderful ways that we can take advantage of this and actually have you might say a revolution. And I'll show you how we can go about doing that. One thing, a little fun fact, garment myths. The old-fashioned kind of recycling, donating and reselling of secondhand clothes is basically a myth. The market has been glutted for years. 84% of unwanted clothes in the United States went to either a landfill or an incinerator. Only about 0.1% of all clothing collected by charities and take-back programs is actually recycled into new textile fiber. I mean, it's just like most stuff gets, cut into rags, you know, and they get shipped overseas because we're importing rags. I mean, it's just like kind of nuts. Cities aren't buying locally, they're sourcing from out of the country because it's cheaper. And meanwhile, our rags go overseas, just kind of nuts. Well, we can talk about when we do talk about recycling and the recycling markets, we kind of like got to break it down into their specific sectors. There's a supply, which we've talked about, and there's a demand, supply sector and demand sector. And when I do analytics for communities and for businesses, I look at the supply demand integration. I profile supply, I profile demand, so I can put the two together. But if we're going to profile anything, you got to take a look at what are the players. We're going to go through a lot of these things, but they're kind of like into three different areas. There's suppliers that do a lot of separation, collection, things of that nature, or they do some very initial uh, preparation, basically collate and bale and containerize and ship someplace for someone else to actually process or beneficiate. Um, and then those beneficiators or processors, uh, they take it and then they have to give it to a market. So that's where we got to buy recycled. And ultimately, a consumer has to buy from these end users, or else there's no circular economy. There's no circularity to our world. Otherwise, they might as well just take all those folks and put it in one truck and take it to the dump if there's nothing else. And that's how we've been handling most of our material. But you can tell that even with such a small amount of recycling compared to the trash, you know, the industry of recycling is $110 billion. With all the material that the trash industry has, they're only about 60 to 65 billion. So recycling has got more bang there, and that's why we got to take advantage of that. So we'll talk about backhauling and casual collection and scavenging, cleanup companies, reuse, refuse haulers, MRFs, and then brokers and recyclers, composters, and then really get down into some of the industry stuff. And I really want to focus on circular economy and the eco-industrial parks. Backhauling is, or what we might call reverse distribution, is a very interesting and very important component these days. Um, Cargo goes one way generally, but sometimes your cargo can go a different way. It can go back. And when I mean back, it's like in trucking, a backhaul is hauling cargo back from point B to the originating point A. So most things start at point A and they go out to point B and so forth and so on. And as they travel around, they're dropping stuff off, like a distributor. They drop off, bottles of water, food, whatever, clothes, magazines, whatever the case may be. They drop it off and they come back empty, and that coming back, with empty means that we're wasting, there's empty space. And then if we have to send other trucks to go out and pick that up, oh my gosh, then we're really wasting, right? So if we can find a way for industries to backhaul stuff, especially their waste, we can make stuff more interesting and more cost effective. We can optimize our system. And that's what some companies have done. It Since it almost costs almost as much time to drive empty as fully loaded, this kind of approach really does make, economic sense. And so it can help to pay for the operating expenses for the trip back to the originating point A for the trucking company and or the trucker. Vons has taken this to a science, and at each store on its daily stocking route, distribution swaps out new products for organic waste. And then they bring it all back. So the truck as is emptying is filling up at the same time. And so at the end of their route, they're full. and they bring all their organics back, to a MRF, where the MRF sorts out the small fraction of non-organics, make sure there's no contamination, and then sends it out to a remote compost site, because that's where our compost sites are. Organics are composted, and there's like about 60% retention of your organics, because when you compost, you lose gases, you lose water, things of that nature. So ultimately, when you start with 100%, your compost is only 60% of what was originally there. That's bagged and then it's distributed right back to Vaughn's under the Vaughn's Select brand. Vaughn's compost sells out, and it costs about $150 a ton to landfill, and it costs about $150 a ton to compost. So that would be a wash, if you could do that. But with the sales of the compost, Vaughn's makes about 20% profit because they sell that stuff at like, oh my gosh, $4 or $5 a bag, and it ends up being quite a bit of money, to do that. Even when you're considering how, the loss of material, due to composting. So with bagging and everything else, it's still it's a good deal. And for Vaughn's, it becomes a profit center. Well, there's always been casual collectors, everything from Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, war efforts. My gosh, even Superman here, World's Finest Comics, fight paper waste and hang one on the on the um, on the madman of Berlin, referring to Hitler. And so there's always been a major effort to try to do the right thing, for a lot of different reasons. Save your waste paper and cardboard. Everyone can help. I mean, it really was a community effort. But this is at a time when things were a lot simpler and materials were very much less complex, you know. But there's always been a lot of casual collectors that go out and do stuff. Now, there's also the non-casual collectors like scavengers, and scavenging is always been another activity that has operated throughout the history of peoplekind. Scavenging is mostly outlawed in California, unfortunately, even though you see a lot of people doing stuff, collecting things. But in 1930s, dump scavengers, there was a lot of folks going out to the dumps during the Depression and just having to try to find whatever you could find to eat, to sell, to use again, whatever the case may be, clothes, anything. Um, Still, there's places around the world like the Coptic Christians operate recycling in Egypt, since you're not supposed to handle trash in specific religions, but the Christians can, so they operate all the recycling programs in Egypt. And there's a picture back in the early days of the 1900s, a garbage scow dumping off New York City, and mostly it was like ash, but there's a lot of bottles and cans. And they used to drive out quite a ways, drop it off, and come back in. And now that all that sludge and stuff like that is kind of coming back to New York, it's been creeping into the harbor, But maybe you've seen a TV show called American Pickers. I maybe take a look at that. I don't know. I've never watched it myself, but I'd be interested to know if anybody's ever seen that. As long as there's been something to throw out, people have thrown it out. There's a little woodcut from way back in the Middle Ages of Europe, and showing people throwing their excrement and you know, because there was no indoor, toilets or anything like that, no piping. So you always had to watch out because someone would be throwing something out the top window. You had to look out below, and streets were designed in a way so all that stuff would go down to the middle of the road, and water would come down the middle of the road and wash that down to the river. And of course, rivers could get pretty funky. but obviously that was a big reason for things like, some of the maladies of the Dark Ages and things like that, um, with some of those illnesses, the plague and things like that, is because rats got infected and then they bite people and people get infected and pretty soon you have a pandemic. Not quite the same as today, but still something that was real. Um, but you have a lot of companies that specialize in stuff like this. One of the famous ones is 1-800-GOT-JUNK. Probably see them in a lot of corners, and they'll quote unquote make waste disappear. They have a little video. If you want to watch it, you can go to YouTube and look for 1-800-GOT-JUNK, and you can see their funny video in which a homeowner snaps their fingers and points at something, snaps their fingers, and bingo, it's gone because you got junk, they'll take it away. Um, they actually have a franchise system. It's a very interesting business model. They franchise just like waste management is a franchise, in different areas, or cities give franchises. Well, their business model is to give franchises, sell them to people, and so they confer this franchise right to maybe a group or a company, local company. They adopt the facade of 1-800-GOT-JUNK. They lease the truck, they lease whatever they need from the company. Sort of like the McDonald's are a franchise too. You do the same thing. You don't own it, but you get to, it's your own business. You pay for your franchise, rights and equipment and things like that, and you get a specific area that you get to work. And those franchises operate outside normal franchises, even though they kind of like overlay on city conferred rights to other haulers. There's many other specialty companies that conduct services or handle materials or products in unique and special ways that serve the purpose of zero waste. Confidential destruction companies, they go out and they pick up confidential paper and destroy that, but through recycling. Even things like moving companies and uniform cleaning services, grease and oil collectors, biofuels, used oil, many others have a variety of different services or handle materials and products. RWS, Resource Recovery, provides specialty services, on-site resource recovery for the telecom industry, in which they work a site. They have their own little resource recovery facility on site. There's like at AT&T, and they take all the batteries and everything else, make sure the recyclables get recycled, bale, cardboard, and things like that. And that's the business model. Okay, haulers and MRFs. That's another segment of the industry. 60 billion U.S. waste management industry grew slightly in the last year. Of course, that's before the pandemic. The pandemic has seen some things decrease, but other things increase because people didn't go away. They just went home and now they make all their waste at home. So my gosh, waste at home has just increased tremendously. And that in itself is an issue for a lot of haulers because it's not always pay as you throw at home for the haulers. They got to pick up whatever's there, you know. And for apartments, it's not quite the same because I know that costs in apartments have gone up quite a bit because the more people have thrown away at home, that means more pickups and it's pay as you throw it in an apartment generally. Um, um, what I'm showing here on this semi-table is total waste about 20 billion tons. C&D debris is about 117 million tons. And C&D debris recycled was 141 million tons. Industrial waste was about 400 million tons. Mining is 7 billion tons. Agriculture, 10 billion tons. And then you have, like all the material that comes from cities. MSW, my gosh, there's 290 million tons. and we're getting about 23% diversion, since 68 million tons out of the 290 are actually recycled. But a lot of the recycling beyond what's coming out of MSW is coming from mining and industrial things of that nature, and C&D. We've talked about recycling centers before, but recycling centers are a big part of the recycling industry, especially the drop-off and buyback recycling centers. And after Earth Day 1970, thousands started across the U.S., ushering in a new age of recycling. Prior to that, recycling became forgotten, including numerous curbside programs. I remember I participated in a curbside program in the 1950s, and then it got eliminated, and then it took 20 or so years before it got restarted again. But I was very happy to be one of the few, or thousands, I should say, that after Earth Day 1970 set up Recycling Center and went to work, and it ushered in a whole new era for me. I had no idea that my career would lie in waste. Well, there's dealers and brokers. A broker is a quote unquote middleman, a middle person who helps facilitate the sale of scrap, maybe metal, paper, between a seller and a buyer for a fee. You know, that- Anybody can be a broker. You can be a broker of real estate. You can be a broker of whatever. You know, um, even talent. You can be a talent broker. But in any event, brokers in recycling generally sell to end-use markets, and they buy from MRFs and haulers and folks like that. But they don't handle it. They just make arrangements. And then you have dealers who actually handle stuff, and they sort and they process and they operate from a scrapyard. And generally, they're trying to beneficiate the recyclable material and prepare it for market. And that's the traditional industry. Okay. Now you went through, most of the suppliers. Now we get into the end users. This is the real focus, the real meat of the recycling market. Most people think of just recycling as supply. Yeah, I recycle. Yeah, right. I just put my materials in a container that says blue bin recycling, and I don't know where it goes or what happens to it. And then I don't buy any recycle. No, you did not recycle. The only way you can say that you recycle is if you buy recycled as well as participate in recycling, and if you do reduce and reuse in your own place. Then you can say I recycle. But in any event, end users, there are local markets, regional, national, international markets, and they all consume material and remake things into new feedstock or goods. Either you make something that somebody else can use, or you make something that somebody can sell and buy. you know. So the ones that I'm really concerned about, the things I'm really interested in are the local markets, local companies that use materials close to the point of generation. That means you can do backhauling, you can do a lot of things. There's a lot less cost involved in terms of, closed loop systems. And so to me, that's where we want to be, and that's how we're actually going to be in, I think, more so in the future than we might imagine. We're going to find there's a lot of issues internationally, and ultimately we may want to rethink how we do a lot of things and maybe focus on small scale, appropriate scale, local local development. So we're going to talk about that. And of course, first, I wanted to mention about, is it recycled? We often see products advertised with some level of content as recycled or recyclable. Recycled content means the product contains secondary materials. There will be some percentage identified often. Recyclable content means that the product can be recycled but does not necessarily contain recycled content. Now, something could be recycled and be uh, recyclable and could contain recycled content. They could be the same. Okay. But generally, if something is a closed arrow, in other words, solid arrows, that means it's recyclable. Doesn't mean it will be. It just means it's recyclable. somebody determined that it was recyclable, sort of like plastic, okay, 10% or less. And then you have post-consumer 100% recycled, and there's a symbol there. It's kind of the closed circle with the, the empty arrows. So the closed arrows, the block arrows mean recyclable. The transparent arrows mean that it's recycled content. And then there's a differential between recycled content. There is pre-consumer, means that the product contains secondary materials made from manufacturer waste that never actually made it to the consumer for one reason or another. It could be scraps, rejects, trimmings. And then post-consumer means that the product contains material that has served its intended use and has been recovered from municipal waste. So that is the more valuable part, because pre-consumer, there is a heck of a lot. In fact, plastics is probably the most pre-consumer recycled product ever. It's like 99.9%, because everybody just has one resin and it's very simple. You don't want to waste that, and paper is very high, aluminum is very high, all those things. So when you get into pre-consumer waste, if someone just says, yeah, 100% recycled, you got to make sure, is it just pre-consumer or is it a combination or post-consumer? That's an important distinction. Okay, now there's something called the Clean Dozen. Okay, thanks to Dan Knapp and Mary Lou Van Devetter. They were at Urbanor. I think they've now retired from Urbanor. But in 1989, he came up with his 12 master categories of resources in the supply chain. And these are, from his perspective and her perspective, how you could potentially reuse something. And they've provided some value per ton. And you can see that reuse, it can be up to $550 a ton, all the way down to something that might have no market. And there's a small amount of residual that is very, very difficult. But even putrescibles and plant debris, things like that, could have a value to it. So anyhow, it's like at that type of tonnage and stuff like that. Somebody did a calculation here and came up with a numerical value, and maybe you can do that too. This is kind of like on average, so you took $8 million divided by 162,000. I don't know, what are you going to come up with? 10, 15 bucks, something like that a ton on average. And depending upon where it is and what it is, it could range anywhere from nothing to quite a bit. I think I've mentioned some values before that other folks have come up with, in terms of the value of what's in there, because the value per ton here is sort of like very conservative. Okay. All right. The point about whole product reuse and recycling is very important. Is that if things were designed in a way for disassembly, there could be several benefits. It can make it easier for your product to be repaired or upgraded, thereby prolonging its useful life. It can also help to ensure your product is recycled and enable whole components to be used for their original purpose or used for an entirely different purpose. What you see here is a typical, you might say, schematic blown up or blowout from a phone. And you can see the different areas. There's circuit boards, there's a variety of different things that all go together into producing a phone. And if you happen to hear the Apple presentation recently, they talked a lot about what goes into a phone these days. It's so elaborate, just amazing. Dozens of magnets and all kinds of different components, and oh my gosh, transistors up the kazoo, it's just so much that goes into that. Well, there are some market issues. The use of raw material is still increasing. Recycling still continues to decline. There's the economics associated with taxation policies that still favor virgin materials. Um, there's some economies that are really powerful, and like out of the, let's say, Middle East, and Saudi Arabia is very dependent upon oil. They're trying to change, but they're still very dependent on oil. Um, so there's economies that are, you might say, have issues that would need to be addressed so that there could be some, you might say, peaceful transition to a different type of economy, a global circular economy, but it would take time. Prices, another issue is that prices for recycled materials, secondary materials, are not much different today than they were 80 years ago. How do we recycle as much as we do today is that mechanization has allowed for more efficient recovery. But that's why a lot of recycling went overseas. They were targeted in urban areas. They were mostly in urban areas. They got targeted for early adoption of environmental regulations. And as a consequence, they could not meet a lot of early regulations and or water quality, things of that nature. And so they either closed down or they went overseas. And a lot of folks overseas don't have the same stringent standards. So there's a lot of issues there. The blue bin blues have caused problems with contamination of recyclable materials, leading to market rejection in foreign markets. Primary users in the United States are leaving for cheap labor markets overseas. And part of that is, like I mentioned, about the dwindling industrial nature of our society. There are also limits to recycling. Glass contamination is very easy with the blue bin system. Metals such as iron are also contaminated, leading to inferior steel. In fact, our glass recovery rate for commingled or single stream recycling is 40%. When it's separated out, it's 90% recovery. And in Europe, it's sorted out and not collected in a single stream, and they get 90% recovery in Europe. Well, there's new market builders. The circular economy, EIPs, urban markets, I think are really primed for where we want to go. Corollary to that is the boutique compost markets. Community and rooftop gardens and office plants need to be fixed and maintained. Of course, now not as many people are at the office, so they're at home. Specialty soil conditioners such as Zudu, things like that can be developed. But generally, our businesses are going to be more small scale, appropriate technology. E-commerce has really changed things for the better. And in terms of better, I mean for recycling, because people can go directly to the source. And of course, you have some other market builders like recycling market development zones, and there's 40 of them in this state. And maybe there could be others around the country, but RMDZs can go together with EIPs. Well, I'm going to spend a little time talking about the circular economy and sustainable materials management, why zero wasting is an American imperative, and it's all part of this EIP, Eco-Industrial Park, and where we need to go. So bear with me for a little bit. EIPs, I believe those are the start of the circular economy. A circular economy is a systemic approach to economic development designed to benefit business, society, and the environment. It's very much in contrast to the take, make, and waste linear economy, and it's distinguished by a regenerative design, and it's aimed to gradually decouple growth from the consumption of finite resources. That's like little graphic there. The only sustainable growth is degrowth. It doesn't mean that we're not consuming anything. It's just that we got to get away from just growth for growth's sake. There probably hasn't been a better term than gross domestic product, because sometimes I could say it is really gross. you know. So a circular economy is based more on the principles of designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and materials in use, and regenerating natural systems so that there's like really there's more for all. Now, it has to be kind of coupled with the idea that we have to try to eliminate greed. There's enough for everybody's need, but there's not enough for everybody's greed. Gandhi had said that. So we have to really take a look at this, and we're going to have that's an educational issue and a incentive issue for a lot of folks and society. But I think that it is indeed possible. And later on in the class, we'll talk about how the possibilities, and how to reach those possibilities. How do you get people to buy into stuff? Because you can. I've been able to do that. And that's why I'm here to help you with that. Okay, so there are arguments for a degrowth economy, that growth itself is at odds with sustainability and economic fairness amongst all humanity. Degrowth means planned and equitable economic contraction in the richest nations, eventually reaching a steady state that operates within Earth's biophysical limits. It's sort of an end to mass consumption for consumption's sake. You know, that argues something different because remember, our system in the United States, forget about capitalism versus socialism. Our system is all about wasting, okay? Mass consumption, planned obsolescence. It doesn't matter what economy you're in because whether socialist or capitalist, people practice these same things. They got to stop practicing this. We got to take a look at how we can kind of decouple ourselves from this growth mode, just consuming and consuming, and find different ways to find happiness, our happiness index. I think it is indeed possible. And I think we're finding a little bit here about that with the pandemic because people are realizing that maybe there's more to life than, like, gee, that Tesla sitting out front in the car in the garage and I can't drive it any place because I got to stay home. Well, what good is a car in the garage? It doesn't help you at all. You're much faster on the internet than you are in a Tesla. So it's like, kind of things can come back full circle. So I've talked to plenty of people who have indicated that they're now rethinking things, and that's one of the best R's. Like if you had to add an R to reduce, reuse, recycle, I would add rethink. Rethink is a great way to focus on the start of the circular economy. And what's the economy got to do with it? Well, actually, a lot. Deindustrialization of America. Over 60,000 factories and nearly 6 million jobs have been lost since 2000. And of course, that's pre-pandemic. Who knows how many we've lost now? Partially it's due to improvements in productivity, but lots of industrial flight to other countries with less stringent eco-regulations. And a lot of people are looking to find well-paid management jobs rather than labor-intensive ones. Our society is rapidly becoming a service-based economy, mostly consumptive, with nearly 70% of our GNP based on service consumption. Coupled with a take, make, and dispose linear economy, there's severe consequences for our environment as well as for the rest of the world. And as for cleaning the ocean, I'm sorry, cleaning the ocean is not the solution to plastic pollution. Yes, we can reverse this. We can plan for zero waste and minimize wasting at the source to the maximum extent feasible. That means every home, every apartment, every business. We all have a role in this. We need total participation in order to make this happen. We need to reindustrialize America using our nation's greatest export, our trash. Build local industrial, eco-industrial parks to reuse and recycle used commodities into new and renewed goods for local consumption. composting, low temperature pyrolysis and biochar, small scale manufacturing, upcycling. I'll show you some of these things. Develop small scale worker owned cooperatives. Legislate against disposability. I'm sorry, some folks say don't ban without a plan. I think that it's time to ban a lot of things and get rid of disposability. I'm sorry. Get rid of the landfills. No more landfills, no more trash cans. We got to stop that. That just continues to empower people. If they got to think about it, they got to do something with it. Maybe they will do something about it. But as long as there's an easy way, then and you just got to pay for it. I'm sorry, that's things are not going to get solved. They're just not. We really got to do a better job of education. Consumers, workers, and generators alike, residential and non-residential, about the 3 R's. That's what I want to really focus on too. I mean, I like this class, but my goal is to educate all 140 million workers in this nation, one worker at a time. And I got a way to do that. And if anybody wants to join me, I'm very happy to invite you to participate. We need to work with residents, businesses, haulers, and recyclers to monetize sustainability, kind of incentivize participation all around. We'll talk a lot more about that later, but monetizing sustainability, that's a real tough one. And that's what I built my business on, which is, in fact, if you go to my website at sustainable-env.com, my company right on the front page, says monetizing sustainability naturally. And the idea is that there are a lot of ways that we can make money doing things differently. But you got to think outside the box. When I go out and talk to a hauler and I talk to him about, you need to make money by being a resource company, not a waste company, and stop collecting stuff. And he goes, well, Mr. Hulse, you do realize we're a collector. And I said, yeah, and that's where you gotta change it. You gotta become a resource company, not a destruction company, not a disposal company, not a waste company. You gotta turn that around and give people an opportunity to do things on their own site and to dispense services to them that can help them become more sustainable. And if you do that, it'll be worth that much more to you because they're going to save money and you get to share in their savings because that's the sustainability monetization. For example, like getting somebody let's say a small package anaerobic digester. You can give that to a larger company that has a lot of organics, and instead of picking up the organics, you can give them that. You don't have to pick it up anymore. And in effect, you can rent the equipment to them, so you're still making the same money before, but now you don't have to send the truck out. Now, so there's a lot of things that people got to rethink about this and rework their business models. Ricoh did that. They were selling stuff and they had the change from selling to leasing. It wasn't easy, but they did make that change. And now they're making more money than ever before. So it is indeed possible. Waste to wealth. Our waste is the greatest source of material wealth in our urban areas. Anywhere from $25 to $500 a ton. And we're paying to throw it away. Why in the world are we paying $150 a ton to throw it away? That doesn't make sense. So what are the small scale business opportunities? Oh my gosh, there's so many. I mean, I just listed a few here. Paper manufacturing. You ever thought about making paper? You can make paper. You can make greeting cards. You can make all kinds of things out of paper, recycled paper, and it looks wonderful. It's got a homey look to things to it. Whole good reuse and repair, wood reuse and mulching, upcycling into new goods, artwork, and more. Organics composting and vermicomposting for soils and urban gardening. Organics into synfuels and biochar. Organic packaging like growing mushrooms to make packaging, repair and remanufacture, chemical recycling. Now, I'm not talking about the plastics bunk or greenwashing. I'm talking about actually taking chemicals and recycle them. glass reuse and recycling, and tire reuse and recycling, and just to name a few. Virtually everything has a potential opportunity to be part of the waste to wealth industries. So you say you want a revolution? Well, it comes from control of the means of production. Oh, yeah. And that's important because revolutions don't happen just because of protests. They happen because we own the means of production. How do you own the means of production if it's owned by a multinational corporation? You own it in your own backyard. You own your own business, like a home-based business. You own that business. If you got a small business that's doing organic packaging, you own that business. Worker-owned cooperatives own that business. And don't think it's some pipe dream. I'm going to show you some things that are going to blow your mind. Yes, worker-owned cooperatives. Workers can own and operate their own local resource management business, compost services, solar, building restoration. This is a few that I've listed here. I mean, there's so many that people have developed. And when I say workers can own and operate, they own and operate. There's 7 cooperative principles: voluntary open membership, democratic member control, autonomy and independence, economic participation, concern for the community, education, training, and information, and cooperation among all cooperatives. So go to usworker.coop/directory/ and find out about all the co-ops that are operating in this country. And you'd be surprised. There's not that many, not as many as the 37 million businesses in the country, but there are a lot of these companies. Now, what's going to really amaze you, if you're not familiar with Mondragon, you really need to be, because Mondragon Corporation. So go to Mondragon dash corporation.com, and just prepare to be amazed, because they are a worker cooperative, a worker-owned cooperative in Spain. They have sales in more than 150 countries. Their gross, I've seen it as high as 40 million, but the fact that I was able to obtain was 12 million euros, and that's probably closer to about 15 million US dollars in 2015, where that figure came from. And they employ 81,000 people. And these 81,000 people own the business. And what's so neat? Those 81,000 people, they cooperatively hire the CEO. The CEO must demonstrate to them at the annual worker meeting that they deserve to be rehired. Can you believe that? But I think this is a wonderful model, for all of us, that we can actually build a business and build our own business and work with others. We spend so much time in our educational system creating competition, dividing people. We go to work, we continue to be divided. We need to cooperate. That's probably the biggest issue that our educational system doesn't deal with, and actually helps create that kind of competition, that nice guys finish last. No, we got to kind of change this narrative. So I really do recommend check out Mondragon and think seriously about worker-owned cooperatives. It's where all those businesses that I showed you before could all be developed and operated. In fact, I have a project coming up in the near future. It's to work with a community and a major business out of Spain, not Mondragon, but a company that wants to come to the United States, and they're going to pay me to help bring them to a community. They want a waste contract. Well, this company they're the largest service provider of anaerobic digestion and composting, MRF, and recycling in the world, as well as waste management. And they're in the billions of dollars. And They're called URBASER, URBASER, and URBASER is from Madrid, and they want to set up in the United States, and I'm going to help them to set up. And I got a community targeted that has its own landfill, and we want to go to that community and say, hey, look, uh, your community has this landfill. It's a liability. You know, you get one job for every 10,000 tons. What if we could turn that into for every 10,000 tons, we could turn that into 200 jobs? What would your community think and say if we could do that? Are you willing to do that? All you need to do is own your landfill and give a contract to this company to operate it and to help set up a series of businesses. Now, my company is going to, while this big company is going to set up and run the landfill and develop a compost facility, develop a MRF, set up anaerobic and aerobic digestion, do all that kind of stuff, you know, the infrastructure, so they can run everything on the energy that's going to be created from the waste. They're going to have streams of material coming out of this facility because it's not going to be operated like a landfill anymore. Only the small amount of residue that the 75 to 90% is, you know, is going to be, you know, we're going to find a new home for it. Well, the rest of it will go into the landfill. The anywhere from 10% to 25% will go into the landfill, which will extend the life of the landfill, you know, double, triple. And then jobs will be created in the local community. And what I want to do is to create a bunch of worker cooperatives or to encourage local industries to come in and build local cooperatives to be set up. And and I think it's really going to be an amazing project. So I'm working in a company that's a disadvantaged business enterprise. My consulting firm is a disadvantaged business enterprise. My mother was from Mexico, and so I qualify as a minority business enterprise. So I'm designated, certified as a disadvantaged business enterprise. The company I'm going to work with as their consultant called um, Majesto Investments, and Majesto is going to do politics and help me with assembling you know, money to invest in this kind of a project. So they're going to find the money. The company is going to give us our own, you know, pay to get this thing set up. I'm going to arrange them to get a contract to run everything there, and then I will work the area surrounding the landfill and build up all these maybe 10, 15 types of businesses that will grow into a eco-industrial park. And it will be a model that could be carried across the United States because again, there's 52 major metropolitan areas and every city needs to have one. And if you really look beyond that, there's 1,200 landfills in the country. I look at that and say there's 1,200 opportunities for projects very similar to that. You know, so hey, sky's the limit. So if you want to come work, I welcome that. I'm always looking for volunteers that want to get started and be part of something, and we'll grow from there. I've actually hired some students in the past that have come and work on very specific projects, and I will need more people as well to work on projects for pay, you know, at $25 an hour or more. Okay, so if you like those kind of words, let's make it happen. One example of a business that could be developed would be, you know, boutique composting. Um, the company URBASER is going to set up a composting facility. The composting facility will produce compost. I want to set up a boutique compost marketing firm, which will bag and market this compost to the local community and beyond. And you know, and create a whole variety of different soils to make specialty compost for boutique markets. And I got a company that already wants to operate this, and I just want them to operate it as a worker cooperative, and they seem willing to be, to want to do that. They're also a minority business. They're having problems in another area because so often communities don't like recyclers. I mean, it's just amazing how local communities think that recycling is somehow bad for people, bad for the environment, and it's not the case. They'll fall over asking the hauler to come in and do stuff, but then a recycler wants to do something, and it's like they'll have to look them over with a fine-tooth comb. It's just not right. I think this is a great opportunity. Nonprofits, organizations can participate. Uh, we could sell compost. There's sales opportunity jobs. There's all kinds of jobs in terms of, horticulturalists, landscapers, gardeners, community gardens. Everybody could use this compost that's going to come off of this facility. And of course, we need to encourage market demand. How demand can be created by procurement policies and purchasing powers. I'm actually working with the city of Paramount on changing their procurement so it meets the requirements of EPPP, Environmentally Preferable Purchasing Policy, which looks at a more holistic gamut of what goes into purchasing to make sure that it's fair, it's equitable, fair trade, it's environmentally just. All those aspects are part of purchasing and procurement. I would ease also restrictions on scavenging. Why in the world are we telling people not to pick up stuff? If they're going to pick it up of their own volition, my gosh, let them, please. Let's stop this whole thing of going out and setting up franchises. My gosh, that's so damaging to the environment and damaging to the economy, especially the informal economy. Um, we should allow least cost recycling option for generators. The whole idea in the Rancho Mirage decision, they said that something had to be of value in order to allow it to occur. So the hauler said, "Hey, if you're charging anybody, then you're in my realm." And cities agreed with that. A lot of cities do. And the state didn't do anything about that. So I think there's a class action suit that needs to be filed that revisits that particular decision, that court decision, because they didn't say that recycling had to be for pay or for donation. It just said economic value. And if I can find someone to take my stuff for less than what the hauler's charging, then so be it. I should be able to do that. And because that's an economic value to me. If it costs me $150 to use a hauler and someone's saying, I'll take it for $50, I just saved $100. That's economic value. And that's an argument that needs to be made. Now, the Recycling Market Development Zone combines both recycling with economic development to fuel new businesses, expand existing ones, create jobs, and divert waste from landfills. And there's actually monies available from the state of California. I have a graphic here from City of Santa Clarita, and they have their own RMDZ, and they're able to attract businesses to come to their location and set up, and they will give them a variety of different benefits or inducements and incentives to set up in their community and to start using material. And then more recently, the state of California passed minimum content requirements for plastic, but by 2035, that's when plastic has to be 50% recycled. Well, market futures. Our urban aura represents money in the bank for local communities and countries. We have the most valuable trash in the world. Trash is worth up to $500 a ton, but not on average. It's probably less than that, and it varies from place to place and condition and such. But and based on how much you can sell stuff for when you break it all down. But as a minimum, easily $25 to $50 a ton, but it could be worth up to 500 per ton. And yet we pay $150 a ton to rid ourselves of it. Even if we got $1 a ton, we're paying $150 to get rid of a dollar. I mean, come on, that doesn't make sense. Consumer demand is got to be there. This is where we got to close the circle, and that can influence the highest and best uses locally. Innovativeness is absolutely essential along with ecopreneurship. And our urban aura represents money in the bank for local communities. When a lot of communities say, well, we got nothing, we don't own trees, we don't own investments, where are they gonna put their money? They're gonna put their money in the bank in a CD and make a fraction of a percent. Why don't they put it into their own raw resources that have been previously processed and are available, and people will want that locally, especially if they encourage worker-owned cooperatives. Hire ourselves. Let's do it. All right, let me talk. I got 3 slides I want to share with you about the current status here in California. In order to achieve the 75% recycling goal by 2025, CalRecycle has identified 6 primary focus areas. Remember, we're only at, 40%? We got to move organics out of the landfill, need more compost facilities. And as far as last time I checked, we had 160 compost facilities and anaerobic digesters, 12 anaerobic digesters and about 150 compost facilities, and half of them don't take food. And they will be able to process about 3 million tons a year out of the 21 million tons that needs processing. And if we want to get to 75% by 2025 for organics, 75% for all waste by 2020, 75% of all organics by 2025. And if we want to get to the 75% by 2025 for organics, that means we need 15 to 16 million tons of capacity. I'm sorry, we can't build these things fast enough. They just are very difficult to build. We need to have distributed organics recycling in our communities. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Maybe if not today, I'll definitely talk about it at a later date. We need to continue to reform the beverage container recycling program. We're losing over 1,000 recycling centers in California just in the last couple of years. And we need to expand the recycling manufacturing infrastructure. And that's where EIPs can come in and explore new models for state and local funding of materials management programs and do more state procurement and local procurement of post-consumer recycled content products, as well as promoting extended producer responsibility. It can no longer be a manufacturer makes something and then puts it on the public to pay for the costs of disposal. I'm sorry, that should not be allowed. And if everybody had to pay for their product being ultimately disposed, that would stop a lot of this stuff. So this particular chart shows you active collection transfer programs and facilities in California, how many statewide for each type, the total capacity where it's known, current throughput where known, and available capacity. And we have quite a bit on supply. Supply, we're looking pretty good. Here we take a look at the beneficiating part of the industry, where they take the supply and process it and get it ready for someone to ultimately use. And what we can see here is that we got quite a few active facilities, and you can see their total capacity in tons, their current throughput and available capacity. And we got plenty of material recovery facility. In fact, we got way more than we need. Construction and demolition, well, I mean, that's been operating for years anyhow. But when you really get down to what's in the solid waste stream, the total capacity you can see is that the capacity is pretty low. It's not as much as we would like to have. Close to 10% on covered e-waste processing. Um, on scrap metal, about 50%. Paper, plastic, plastic, very low, less than 10%. Paper stock processing, maybe about a third available capacity. Glass, very low. Um, so if you look down the line, there's a lot of issues. There's a lot of, and issues also reflect opportunities, for these EIPs and others. The state has also provided, um, information about once things are collected and processed, where do they go? And within the state, we can see that there's not all that many active facilities. And in some ways, the capacity, available capacity is relatively low. Plastics, not just processing it and getting it ready to be used by somebody. When you look at that, 3,000 out of 71,000 capacity, that's not enough. Glass product manufacturing, less than 10%. Paper and paperboard manufacturing, hardly anything. We're not sure how much some of the other things are because the state hasn't been able to provide enough information about this. But there's just so much more material that than the actual capacity to consume it and produce new products. That's the critical, that you might say is the point, the bottleneck for us. We got supply mechanisms, but we don't have demand mechanisms. And so there's minimal manufacturing infrastructure in California. And if all the reported material from processing facilities for glass, paper, and plastics went to manufacturing in California, the supply would exceed the manufacturing capacity by more than 300%. We're woefully inadequate. What is a problem for some is an opportunity for others. I hope you're on the part of the equation that's opportunity. And if you want to achieve greatness, you got to stop asking for permission. I learned that lesson a long time ago when I was in school. And when I was in school, it's like I demonstrated, I protested, and I also got involved in a recycling program and began to build what I thought was the new economy. And it's taken time. Yeah, 50 years, but 50 years is a blip on the geologic scale. It's a blink of the eye. And so in my lifetime, we've gone from, and let me share this story just to end this presentation, and that is at the first meeting of the California Resource Recovery Association when we formed at Long Beach State University in 1974. I invited the Los Angeles County sanitation districts to send a representative because they ran all the landfills and they were keeping pricing on landfills low, which we opposed. We thought that it should be pay as you go, pay as you throw, and they were saying, no, we need to keep, rates low. Um, and so they came to the meeting and we gave them a forum to talk to people. And before the assembled masses from all over California, who were there, all starting up recycling centers and programs and such. The individual representing the sand districts stood up in front of everybody, and he started wagging his finger at everybody. When will you people get it through your thick skulls that you're never ever going to recycle more than 2%? And everybody was like shocked that this guy was saying it, but to me it was a challenge. And what are we talking about today? Zero waste, and it's possible. We can get there. Companies I've talked to, I've talked to the folks at Ricoh Electronics. When I talk to them, I have them on video saying, zero waste, is it possible? Of course it's possible. We did it. Anybody can do it. And Anybody can do it. It's got to go a step at a time. You got to change one heart and one mind at a time. And we have the ability to do just that today. Our educational mechanisms that we have available, smartphones, internet, so much that we have that we can reach out to people and we can touch them and we can let them know and we can show them exactly what they can do in their home and in their business. We can make them more employable. We can make them more efficient and effective. We can help them to make every business more efficient and effective, increasing profits. Owners and worker cooperatives will do better. When they do the right thing, they will come a time that they will do better and they will continue to outperform the wasters and the polluters, and they will no longer be in business, and it will change. I guarantee it.